Before the rise of capitalism, Europe was chained by a rigid order of feudalism. Land was wealth, and peasants were bound to it. Power rested in the hands of monarchs and lords, while merchants lived in the shadows of castles, trading modestly under royal permission. But as trade routes opened through the Mediterranean, a new class emerged. The merchants. They carried spices, silk, and silver, and with them came the seeds of freedom. They were not born to land but to risk, to contract, and to opportunity. The 14th century brought plague and war. The Black Death shattered feudal order, and the 100 Years' War drained kingdoms. In the ruins of power, opportunity emerged. Wealth began to shift from land to trade. With land losing value, commerce rose as Europe's heartbeat. Cities like Venice, Florence, and Genoa became hubs of wealth, the first laboratories of capitalism. But one city would soon surpass them all. In the cold north, a small republic began to bloom, the Dutch Republic. Independent, defiant, and born from rebellion against Spain, it would become the epicenter of the modern financial world. Freedom was the Dutch weapon. When Spain's empire tried to suppress them, the Dutch turned their fight for survival into an economic revolution. They built wealth not from conquest but from trade. By the 1600s, Amsterdam rose as the new Venice, a city built not on gold but on trust, contracts, and risk. Canals became the arteries of capitalism, carrying goods and ideas from across the world. In 1602, Amsterdam gave birth to something the world had never seen: the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, the first multinational corporation, the first public stock, the first shared risk. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange became the beating heart of global capitalism. Here, men traded not goods, but ownership, the idea that wealth could be multiplied through imagination. For the first time, power shifted from monarchs to markets. The Dutch had built a new world order, one where profit replaced divine right and risk replaced inheritance. Capitalism was born. In the 17th century, Amsterdam achieved what no empire ever could. It detached wealth from the physical. Gold and silver were heavy, finite, and dangerous to move, but paper, a promise, a ledger, a note could move across oceans in seconds. Here, money became an idea, a belief in credit, backed by reputation rather than metal. In 1609, the Amsterdam Exchange Bank, or Wissel Bank, was founded. It wasn't just a place to store money, it created trust. Merchants deposited coins of all shapes and origins. The bank issued notes representing their value, standardized, reliable, and easy to trade. For the first time in history, trust itself became currency. Then came the radical idea: shares. A merchant no longer needed to risk his entire fortune on one voyage. Instead, he could buy a fraction, a share of a company's profit and risk. This transformed the world. Risk became divisible. Fortune became collective. For the first time, wealth wasn't just for the nobles. Bakers, blacksmiths, and even widows invested their savings in VOC shares. The markets gave birth to a new species, the investor. The promise of profit replaced royal decrees as the source of power. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange was a spectacle of human ambition. Brokers shouted, deals were sealed with nods. Fortunes rose and fell in minutes. For the first time in history, value moved faster than ships. The world had become a market. Before Amsterdam, wealth was frozen in land, gold, or grain. But now, liquidity, the ability to move wealth quickly, became the essence of power. A man could buy, sell, and transfer his fortune without ever leaving his chair. Capitalism was no longer about possession. It was about motion. But with freedom came folly. Amsterdam soon learned the intoxicating thrill of speculation. In 1637, during the tulip mania, the price of a single bulb surpassed that of a house. When the bubble burst, fortunes evaporated overnight. The first lesson of capitalism had been written in loss. The Dutch didn't just gamble, they calculated. They invented double-entry bookkeeping, early insurance, and futures contracts. Every transaction was measured, every risk quantified. Amsterdam had become a laboratory of rational greed, where mathematics met ambition. At the heart of all this was trust, faith, not in kings or gods, but in each other. The entire financial system rested on the belief that paper promises would be kept. Capitalism was, in essence, a religion of credit, faith turned into finance. By 1650, Amsterdam ruled the world, not through conquest, but through contracts. Armies could be defeated, empires could fall, but the invisible empire of finance built on trust, credit, and imagination would outlive them all. By the mid-1600s, the merchants of Amsterdam had become the new monarchs of Europe. Without thrones, without crowns, they ruled through ledgers. Their power wasn't declared, it was calculated. While kings spent, the merchants invested. And in that difference, history quietly shifted. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company VOC was born, the world's first multinational corporation. It could wage war, sign treaties, and coin its own money. This wasn't just a business, it was a state made of shareholders. And its mission was simple: profit, at any cost. From the Spice Islands of Indonesia to the harbors of Japan and India, VOC ships charted new worlds. They didn't just trade, they controlled. Every route was a thread in a web of global commerce. spun from Amsterdam's counting houses. The city became the beating heart of a world economy. The VOC's soldiers didn't fight for kings, they fought for dividends. War had become privatized. Cannons defended profit margins. Conquest balanced on ledgers. And behind every battle lay the same force: shareholder ambition. Amsterdam's wealth carried a dark secret: slavery. From the sugar fields of the Caribbean to the African coasts, human lives became commodities. Shares and suffering financed marble mansions along the heron-gracked capitalism's golden dawn was painted in human shadow. Every voyage faced storms, pirates, and mutiny. So Amsterdam invented another tool: insurance. Risk itself became a product. Investors could now buy protection for their profits. Even fate had a price tag. To dominate trade, one must dominate information. Amsterdam built an empire of knowledge maps, ship logs, trade data, and rumors from every port. Merchants became intelligence agents. Finance became foresight. Gold flowed through Amsterdam like a river. Art, science, and philosophy bloomed alongside profit. Rembrandt painted bankers as heroes. Spinoza wrote of freedom in the shadow of commerce. It was a civilization powered by ambition and financed by trade. Yet not all celebrated this prosperity. Preachers warned that greed had replaced God. Philosophers questioned whether freedom bought with gold was freedom at all. Amsterdam's success raised a timeless question: can a society worship profit and remain moral? By 1700, Amsterdam's influence reached every corner of the earth, not through armies but contracts. The VOC had proven that capitalism could conquer more completely than any sword. A new empire had risen, not of kings, but of capital. By the early 18th century, Amsterdam had become the richest city on earth, but with abundance came arrogance. Merchants turned into nobles. Risk turned into vanity. The city that once traded in ideas now traded in illusions. Fortunes were made not by building, but by betting. Tulip mania had been a warning, but the lesson was forgotten. Speculation returned, this time on ships, spices, and company shares. Traders gambled on prices they'd never see, on goods that never arrived. The market had become a theater of delusion. Capitalism was eating itself. By the mid-1700s, the once mighty Dutch East India Company was drowning in debt. Corruption spread through its ranks. Colonies bled from overexploitation. The company borrowed endlessly to pay dividends, a financial illusion centuries ahead of its time. The empire of profit had turned into an empire of promises. Across the Channel, a new empire was watching. London studied Amsterdam's system and copied it: the joint stock company, the central bank, and the bond market. While Amsterdam stagnated, London innovated. The student was about to surpass the master. The Dutch Republic, once the envy of Europe, found itself caught in endless wars. France and England battled for dominance, and Amsterdam's fleet, once unstoppable, began to rust. Each war demanded loans. Each loan deepened dependence. The invisible empire of finance had become a chain. The Dutch guilder, once the strongest currency in the world, began to falter. Confidence, the lifeblood of finance, evaporated. Foreign investors withdrew. Markets collapsed. The empire built on trust had finally lost it. As Amsterdam declined, London absorbed its wealth, its knowledge, and its ambition. Dutch bankers moved their gold to the Thames. The financial capital of the world quietly shifted west. Amsterdam had invented capitalism, but London would perfect it. In 1799, the Dutch East India Company collapsed under its own weight. Corruption, debt, and empire fatigue consumed it from within. The world's first corporation became the world's first corporate corpse. Its death marked not an end, but a transformation, the birth of modern capitalism's next phase. History, as always, whispered its warning. When profit becomes purpose, collapse follows. Amsterdam's downfall wasn't an accident, it was an inevitability. Every empire, financial or otherwise, plants the seeds of its own destruction. Yet even in ruin, Amsterdam's legacy endured. It had taught the world that wealth could be created, not mined, that value could exist beyond metal. The modern world, its banks, markets, and debts, all trace their roots to this small, ambitious republic. The city that fell had built the system that would outlive kings. By the dawn of the 18th century, London was ready. Amsterdam had built the blueprint. Britain built the empire. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, began lending not to merchants but to monarchs. Debt, once a burden, became a weapon. Through loans, Britain learned to rule the world. Britain's true empire was not her colonies, it was her bondholders. Citizens financed wars through government bonds, creating a cycle of investment and loyalty. The people no longer served a crown, they funded it. The national debt became the invisible throne upon which Britain sat. But London, like Amsterdam before it, soon faced temptation. The South Sea Company promised untold riches from trade with South America. Investors poured fortunes into dreams. When the truth surfaced that there was no wealth, the bubble burst. Even Isaac Newton lost his savings, lamenting, "I can calculate the motions of the stars, but not the madness of men." Despite collapse, London emerged stronger. From the ruins of speculation, it built discipline, regulation, auditing, accounting. The City of London became a self-governing fortress of finance, independent even from Parliament. It was both a city and a state within a state. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Factories, machines, and steam engines transformed labor into productivity. London financed it all. Capitalism had found its engine, powered by coal, credit, and human ambition. By the 19th century, Britain's empire spanned the globe, but it wasn't the army that sustained it, it was capital. Every colony was an investment, every war a calculation, every port a ledger entry. London had turned imperialism into an accounting system. In 1821, Britain anchored its currency to gold, the gold standard. The world followed. It was the final evolution of Amsterdam's dream, a universal trust system where money's value rested on faith in empire. Gold was no longer metal, it was order. London's true rulers were no longer lords or soldiers, they were bankers. Families like the Rothschilds financed kings and rebuilt nations. Information traveled faster than armies. A telegraph message could decide wars. Money had become omnipresent, invisible yet absolute. But beneath the wealth, the working class toiled in smoke and hunger, while financiers built mansions, children labored in mills. Capitalism had lifted nations but divided humanity. London's brilliance cast a shadow over its own people. By the late 1800s, London reigned supreme, the financial heart of the world. From her banks flowed the lifeblood of modern civilization. But like Amsterdam before it, her triumph carried the seeds of her future fall. Every empire, no matter how rich, must one day pay its debt. As the 20th century dawned, the world still ran on London's gold standard, but gold, for all its brilliance, was a prison. When war erupted in 1914, nations could no longer afford to be bound by metal. They printed paper, borrowed futures, and mortgaged destiny. The age of fiat money had begun. After 2 world wars, power crossed the Atlantic. The United States, untouched by devastation, inherited the empire of finance. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, a new world order was drafted. The dollar would become the new gold. Amsterdam's dream had traveled from canals to skyscrapers. The IMF and World Bank rose as the twin towers of this new system. They promised the stability, but delivered control. Nations no longer fell to armies, but to debt. Loans replaced chains, and economics replaced conquest. The colonial age had not ended, it had evolved. In 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. For the first time in history, money existed only as belief. Value became faith, trust became currency. The invisible empire reached its purest form, intangible yet absolute. The 1980s brought computers, machines that turned finance into magic. Markets moved faster than minds. Traders no longer needed ships or gold, only screens and algorithms. The alchemy of Amsterdam became software. From London to New York, Hong Kong to Frankfurt, a single financial network emerged. Capital flowed like electricity. Borders blurred, and the old centers of power fused into one. The marketplace had become the world itself. And yet, as it expanded, inequality deepened. The Great Depression, the 2008 collapse, each was a reminder. Every empire of finance forgets its foundations. Credit, when unrestrained, devours its creators. Yet after every fall, the system rebuilt itself larger, faster, and more fragile. Now, we live in a world of digital money, cryptocurrency, central bank digital currencies, invisible wealth. Once, coins clinked in purses. Now numbers flicker on screens. The revolution Amsterdam began has left the material world behind. Money has become pure abstraction and pure power. The merchants of Amsterdam did not set out to rule the world. They sought stability, a way to measure trust, to trade without fear. But every innovation carries a curse. What began as balance became domination. The question remains, can we reclaim the soul of capitalism? We stand at another turning point. The world is as unequal as ever, yet more connected than imagined. Perhaps, in understanding how capitalism was born, we can choose how it evolves. The story of Amsterdam is not just history, it is prophecy, because the system they built still shapes our tomorrow. From the narrow canals of Amsterdam to the digital screens of Wall Street, the journey of capitalism is the story of belief, in value, in trust, in progress. But belief is fragile. And when faith in money fades, societies must rediscover what truly sustains them. The empire of finance was not built overnight, and its next chapter is still being written.